In a mostly empty lecture hall on the campus of Swarthmore College, a small liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia, Emma Cape buzzes through her presentation for the Bradley Manning Support Network with the poise and pace of quiet passion. She's on her third stop of an awareness tour advocating the release of U.S. Army Private First Class Bradley Manning, who faces pending charges as the alleged source of classified material released by WikiLeaks, and she already seems to have her talking points down.
I think those of us who are part of the support network believe that we, the people, should have more influence over our foreign policy than we do, and we should know more about the reasoning behind it than we do.
As a result of the leak, we, the people, have had a 500,000 document glimpse into U.S. foreign policy that includes the Iraq war logs and the Afghanistan war diaries.
For the respective conflicts, the sort of day-to-day logs of what was going on.
U.S. diplomatic cables.
250,000 documents comprising communication between the U.S. State Department and U.S. diplomats who are overseas.
And a video known as Collateral Murder, depicting a 2007 U.S. helicopter attack on civilians in Iraq. WikiLeaks, a non-profit organization that publishes secret and classified media, obtained the cache and posted it in its entirety online.
So essentially, to the extent that a lot of Americans have now heard of WikiLeaks, it's all because of these documents that Bradley Manning is accused of releasing.
The leak has since become an important primary source for journalists. In fact, the Bradley Manning Support Network reports that as much as half of every issue of the New York Times in the past year has cited one or more of the documents. This apparent influence may cost Manning life in prison. Since May 2010, according to several broadcast news agencies, Manning has been charged with over 22 offenses, including aiding the enemy, a capital crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But Cape doesn't see Manning's alleged actions as a crime. Instead, she likes to compare Bradley Manning to Daniel Ellsberg, the famous leaker of the Pentagon Papers. Covering the period from 1945 to 1967, the Pentagon Papers were a top-secret historical study revealing the government's decision to expand the Vietnam War to Cambodia and Laos.
Daniel Ellsberg now works with us very closely and says that no one has reminded him of himself so much in 40 years as does Bradley Manning.
Cape says that, like Ellsberg, Manning is a whistleblower and no traitor, a man whose courage has brought to light countless crimes and has increased the transparency necessary to democracy. Even before he left for Iraq, Cape says, Manning's web logs show his motives were to enhance the army, not to betray it.
And he really hoped he could save lives and spread democracy. So obviously, when he joined the army, he was doing it with good intentions.
And indeed, Cape also thinks her work will spread democracy. At 25, just 2 years older than Private Manning, Cape says she can identify with him as part of the generation who grew up trying to understand the broadly defined war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan.
It's overall an unpopular war. I mean, numerous polls have shown most Americans are against it. And there's this sense of hopelessness, like, why can't we influence our policies, and how do we get into this mess?
Eventually, Cape says, this sense of powerlessness is what forced Manning to work outside the chain of command to protest apparent injustices. Wired.com has published Manning's unabridged web chats with convicted former hacker Adrian Lamo. In one conversation, Manning claims he was asked to arrest Iraqi scholars investigating the allotment of aid money in Iraq. Fearing the consequences if he followed orders and turned them over to Iraqi forces, who the State Department acknowledges as employing torture, Manning tried to speak with a superior.
He reported this to his commander, that he thought they were arresting innocent people, and his commander allegedly told him to shut his mouth and do his job.
Back in Cape's presentation, the few audience comments have been substantial, but not exactly critical. Then, about 40 minutes into the talk, Cape opens up to questions.
Aren't you advocating for the impossible? Like, if you have information, like, who would make the judgment call of making the embarrassment or national security risk? I mean, obviously you're stressing democracy, but do you think that there are stuff that people should not know?
For a tense moment, Cape fumbles for an answer.
See, no one's ever asked me that question.
When she regains her footing, she offers an off-script reply.
All the time in this country, that there's, 8 times as much secrecy as there was 10 years ago. And I don't know if that makes us any safer.
But the audience member's first question, aren't you advocating for the impossible, seems to have resonated with Cape. A few comments later, she says she doesn't think anyone can create a perfect society in their lifetime.
So, at least in my mind, it makes sense to advocate for individuals, to advocate for a position on a particular policy that's affecting us now.
What's more, she says, if Manning is convicted, it could have serious consequences deviating even further from any abstract ideal.
Especially when talking about classified information is routine practice by journalists in the U.S., especially when other people who've witnessed war crimes, such as Ethan McCord, are so afraid to come forward because of the culture in the military right now.
Tommy Fortuna, a freshman at Swarthmore College who attended Cape's presentation, is a former serviceman and conscientious objector. Defined by the U.S. Supreme Court, conscientious objector status means he has proven to the military that he sincerely objects to war in all forms. Fortuna recalls how some officers reacted to news of the leaks.
There were definitely some very angry officers about the situation that definitely were not in favor of what Bradley Manning or Julian Assange had done, but I was in favor of what they did, and I can't have any more support for Bradley Manning than I do.
After the presentation, Cape says the tough questions have forced her to consider why she feels so strongly about government transparency. She hadn't planned to become an anti-war activist following her college graduation. Her activism had pertained almost exclusively to environmental justice. But she says, in hindsight, the two activist circles have significant overlap.
I think that a lot of these issues tie together in many different ways. A lot of people speculate that most wars in the world happen over natural resources.
In fact, Cape may not have even taken the job at the Bradley Manning Support Network if not for her interest in environmental activism. It turns out that the thousands of leaked documents not only depict possible war crimes, but also corporate intrigue with notable environmental consequences.
But more specifically, the WikiLeaks documents have revealed evidence of a number of cases in which government agencies around the world were working to prevent public knowledge of environmental crimes committed by corporations.
Cape has a habit of looking at the causes of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan broadly. She sees mounting secrecy, in corporations as well as in the government, as the root factor in these contemporaneous conflicts. That 1-to-8 ratio she cited earlier, that for every single classified document in 2001, there were 8 classified documents in 2010, seems to have made a bold impression on her. But do these documents have information so sensitive it could endanger lives? Cape says it's possible individuals mentioned in the cables may be put at risk.
But I also believe, truly, that far more people have been harmed in a way that could have been prevented had we as an American public, as an international public, been allowed to have more open conversations about these controversial foreign policies that were being driven by corporations, by the elite who are not going to be directly affected by conflict.
Fortuna concurs, citing the military's focus on taking responsibility for one's actions.
There was military engagement that caused those deaths, and for them to blame Bradley Manning for releasing that evidence and then blaming him for retaliatory attacks because of that event seems to me to be not taking responsibility for your actions.
Cape might say Fortuna's perspective is part of a broad spectrum of opinion about Bradley Manning among the government and the military.
I'll put it this way. I've had conversations with people who worked at agencies like the CIA, the FBI, the U.S. State Department, some of whom support Bradley Manning, some of whom don't. The ones who do support Bradley Manning are not going to be very public about that support because their bosses, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, military officials, all would like to see Bradley Manning go to prison for life.
It sounds like an organic response from an environmental activist assuming a new role as a war resistor. Cape says she'd like to continue as a political advocate, hopefully in the vein of human rights and environmental rights.
But really, I'm not thinking that far in the future. Really, I'm just thinking about what we can do to get Bradley Manning free right now.
For War News Radio, I'm Amy DiPierro.